Hello, I'm Chloe Bruce, and yet another video here now about how it feels to be psychotic, or as the case may be, somebody who's diagnosed with schizophrenia. I would interpret it as something a bit different these days. But I've talked about how I've been homeless and some of the socio-economic problems in Britain. I talked about my homelessness in a B&B for the homeless for 11 months, and I had some trauma to do with this, and linked to government attitudes and the attitudes of Wandsworth Council. And today I'd just like to say very briefly how it feels in the context of this diagnosis to be homeless. So consequences of my homelessness for 11 months, as I have described in earlier videos, namely being in this B&B for the homeless for nearly a year, not this flat but previously, is that my voices started to give me tips on how to survive in the wild. I'd pass a pond, let's say in the park, and my voice would say, "You can wash there and dry yourself with your clothing." I couldn't work out how to keep my clothing clean if I were to be homeless, and this was a grave concern. In fact, it was my chief concern. I thought that I might be able to manage hot meals by finding thrown away baking foil, washing it in the pond, and then wrapping things like crab apples or nuts in it and baking them in a sort of hot coals or hot wood, the ashes, the embers of the fire. And I thought that I'd be able to light this fire. I could get certainly kindle and stuff like that, but I'd be able to light this fire with one of the many discarded cigarette lighters I would see lying around. My voices would say things like, here's water, but don't get your clothes on if you were to bathe in it." It was endless chit-chat about how to survive, but it was though external people were speaking to me. The whole process was to break the spell of other people's power over me when it comes to the housing situation. And I was so distressed at this endless bullying by Wandsworth Council about my flat, including unnecessary discussions of my mental health with various bodies and family issues also. I started to think I simply wanted to give it all up and have my own power, to be in charge of myself in a wild context. So I was very worried that I'd get so hungry that I'd start to steal from shops. I've never been one to steal at all, and I had one when I was 11. I shoplifted once or twice from a shop, and I still feel guilty about it. I'm just not one to do that. I was very frightened of getting into trouble as a consequence. I hadn't done this, but I was worried, what if I were to get hungry? And I thought it over, and I thought, just be honest, pop into the shop and explain to the supermarket security what was going on and why, and to explain that it wasn't my fault. And I thought then they might be able to spare me some throwaway food each evening or in the morning. I realised that most of the food part would be impossible without modern infrastructure. I couldn't find a way around this at all, at least not here in Britain. Although I thought of nuts as a very good source of nutrition. When they're in season, you can find them. And also very calorific. This was something I thought would work out well. While crab apples and berries would be excellent for things like vitamin C and other nutrients. And as for sleeping and being on the cold side, I thought that I could partly bury myself to stay in the warmth, to keep warm, bury myself somehow. And I was very preoccupied by issues of acclimatisation and whether I would just get used to it in some manner. I thought if I had any belongings, like say bank cards or something like that, I could find a place to bury them. But I was concerned about a ruthless type of person who would just look for that kind of thing, follow you around looking to see where your buried treasures were, even to the point where they might carry a metal detector to find coins and anything else metallic. I also thought that the birds and cats might be able to help me with some food. And it was a long dialogue with myself also, how to do this, how to do that, and I thought, oh, I see this would work, that will work. Anyway, I've also discussed other so-called psychotic symptoms in many earlier videos, and I talk about one, how I felt I was, I can't say I don't still feel it. I feel that there's, I think what physicists term a block universe, that everything happens at once, we're all still here, and as such I feel I could communicate with Albert Einstein and Sigmund Freud, who I understand were contemporaries and may have worked together in some fashion. At least that's what these voices were telling me. I've discussed this in an earlier video. And so during this time, not only was I and these sort of external people preoccupied by how to live away from the trappings, all this leverage they try and get on you, the endless stress of having to deal with incompetence and enter the wilds. It was also a spiritual experience, a very interesting, pure spiritual experience. But I was also thinking heavily about the war. I thought there was an impending war and even a current war. I thought about weaponry and military tactics and how to cope in the event of war throughout this period. This would have been from 2018 to now even. Anyway, as I said, my voices are benign. The only time that I've had negative voices that were really extremely painful was for a brief period when in Queen Mary's Hospital in 2002. And just to bear in mind, I talked about how it's naive to assume that my symptoms exist on their own. A few years after being diagnosed with schizophrenia, I was diagnosed with epilepsy. And I was put on a list for a test for autistic spectrum disorder, but I've taken myself off for reasons I've discussed in earlier videos. I don't see any point in such a test. If there is such a thing, I'm probably just going to have to accept that I'm probably just who I am. I don't really understand the difference between me and anyone else. Why I would have that, not anyone else. It's just very weird. But I can't say I can't see those traits in myself, but I don't know what other people think about these traits in themselves. Anyway, I just thought that'd be interesting to see this endless, yes, I could eat that, I could go there, I could live there, I could sleep here, this endless thing. But of course, safety was a chief preoccupation. I thought I could somehow vanish, as I had an invisibility cloak to avoid danger, to avoid dangerous people in particular. I was somewhat worried about wild dogs or stray dogs. But anyway, it was sort of comforting to think that this would happen. And one day I'd like to think, I like to think that one day we'll all be free of these trappings and free to roam in any fit state we see. Thank you for listening.